Okay, so let's jump right in. Deep inside the digital brains of AI, there's this really fascinating mystery that's starting to play out. As we keep building these bigger and more powerful AIs, you gotta wonder, are they all starting to think in the same way? Like, are they all stumbling upon the exact same truths about our world totally on their own? That's the big question we're gonna unpack today. All right, think about something simple, like a cat, right? You've got a vision model, and it learns what a cat is by looking at millions of cat pictures. Then you have a language model, and it learns about cats by reading, well, pretty much everything ever written about them. They're learning from totally different worlds of data. So the question is, do they actually end up with the same idea inside their heads of what a cat is? And that question right there leads us to our first big idea, this possibility of like a shared digital mind. Now, to really get a handle on this, you've got to remember that most AI models are specialists. It's not like they're born with some general understanding of everything. A language model, it just eats text. A computer vision system just looks at images. You've got others that are built to understand protein structures or even predict what a molecule smells like. They're all experts, but only in their one little corner of the world. But here's where it gets kind of weird. Researchers are starting to find that as these super different, super specialized models get better and better, the way they represent the world internally, it's starting to look shockingly similar. It really suggests that even though they're trained in totally different ways, some kind of common understanding of reality might be bubbling up from the inside. So to try and explain what's going on here, a group of researchers at MIT looked way, way back, like 2,400 years back, to an old idea. We're going to talk about Plato's cave, but, for AI. And what they came up with is called the Platonic representation hypothesis. The core idea is pretty simple, actually. They're saying that all these different AI models, even though they're only seeing their own unique little slice of the world, their own data, they're starting to land on the same shared or Platonic understanding of the real world that's creating all that data. So, quick refresher on the original story, right? You've got these prisoners who have been stuck in a cave their whole lives. All they can see are shadows flickering on the wall in front of them. For them, those shadows are reality. They have no clue that there are real objects, actual three-dimensional things outside the cave making those shadows. And this is just a perfect analogy for the AI hypothesis. The AI models, they're the prisoners. The data they're trained on, all the text, all the images, that's just the shadows on the wall. And the real world, that's the stuff outside the cave. And Philip Isola, who was the senior author on the paper, he puts it perfectly. He says the reason the models line up is because they're both shadows of the same world. Okay, that all sounds really cool from a philosophical standpoint, right? But how in the world do you actually measure an AI's thought? Let's dive into the science of how these researchers are actually measuring the shape of these digital ideas. So the key thing to get here is that an AI's internal idea of something isn't a picture or a word. It's just math. It's basically a really, really long list of numbers. And researchers can visualize that list of numbers as an arrow. It's called a vector, pointing to a very specific spot in this huge, high-dimensional space. And inside any one model, this makes a ton of sense. The little arrow, the vector for the word dog, is going to be really close to the vectors for pet and furry, right? Because those concepts are all related. But it's going to be super far away from the vector for something like molasses. It's kind of a math version of that old saying, you shall know a word by the company it keeps. Okay, so here's the clever part. To compare two different models, researchers can't just compare the individual arrows directly. Instead, they look at the big picture, the overall shape of how each model organizes a bunch of concepts together. They're checking to see if the relationships, like the distances between dog, cat, and jellyfish, make the same kind of pattern in both models. They are literally measuring the similarity of similarities. And what they started to find led to this just fantastic analogy from a paper a few years back. They call it the Anna Karenina scenario. The idea is that as these AI models get better and more successful, their internal maps of the world actually become more and more alike. It's just like that famous opening line from Tolstoy's novel. Maybe all successful AIs are alike, while every unsuccessful AI is unsuccessful in its own special way. But this is where the story takes a really interesting turn. Because this is not a settled fact, not even close. This whole idea has kicked off a huge, and I mean huge, scientific debate. Basically, you've got two camps. On one side, you have Isla's team, the convergence camp. They're arguing that the similarities are the real story here. That's what really tells us what's going on, and it points to some universal truth. But on the other side, you have the divergence camp, with folks like Alexei Efros. They argue that no, the differences are what's actually important, because they show us what gets lost in translation when you go from, say, an image to text.
I mean, Isol's whole point of view is that, look, the endeavor of science is to find the universals. He's basically saying that focusing on where these models agree is what's going to give us the deepest understanding of what's really happening under the hood.
But then Efros comes back with this just killer counter-argument. He says there's a reason why you go to an art museum instead of just reading the catalog. And that just nails it, right? Reading a description of a painting is absolutely not the same as seeing the painting. He's arguing that there's unique information baked into an image that you can never fully get from text. And the other way around, too. And those differences, he says, are everything. So, okay, why should we care about this kind of nerdy debate between scientists? Well, it turns out the answer to this question has some massive, real-world consequences for where AI is headed. Think about it. If there really is a shared representation out there, like a Rosetta Stone for AI, that would be an absolute game changer. We could start translating ideas between different models. We could build way more powerful AI that can understand text and images and sound all at once, seamlessly. And maybe, just maybe, we could finally understand why just making these models bigger and feeding them more data seems to work so darn well.
And all of this leaves us with one last kind of mind-bending thought. If these artificial minds, starting from totally different places, are really all zeroing in on one single Platonic truth about our reality, well, what might they be seeing about our world that we, stuck here in our own biological caves, are completely missing?